Admiral Kekstar stood tall on the bridge of his massive warship as he watched the last city burn on the planet below. The orange flames danced across his cold reptilian eyes while smoke rose into the darkening sky. His sharp claws tapped against the metal railing as he savored this moment of complete victory. The Dominion's Edge, his flagship, hung in space like a metal predator watching its prey die slowly. "Admiral, the final resistance groups have been eliminated," reported Commander Vashti from her station. Her scaled fingers moved quickly across the control panel as she read the battle reports. "All Centauri military installations are destroyed, and their population centers are no longer functional." Kekstar's mouth curved into what might have been a smile if he were capable of such human emotions. The Zephyrian Empire had spent 50 long years planning and executing what they called the Great Cleansing. Every species that showed signs of advanced technology had been marked for destruction. Every world that could threaten their dominance had been burned to ash. Every rival civilization had been wiped from existence. "How many species have we eliminated in total?" Kekstar asked as he turned away from the burning world. 47 confirmed extinctions, Admiral," Vashti replied without hesitation. "The Altarians were the first to fall 23 years ago, followed by the Kepler Federation, the Tau Ceti Alliance, and dozens of smaller civilizations. The Centauri were the last major power in this sector." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of ship systems. Every Zephyrian present understood the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Their empire now controlled every star system within 300 light years. No other species possessed the technology to travel between stars. No other civilization could challenge their authority. They had achieved what their ancestors only dreamed of: absolute dominance over their corner of the galaxy. Far away in a different star system, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison sat in front of multiple screens in a cramped monitoring station. The human colonial navy had established this outpost 6 months ago to observe what they initially thought was a standard territorial conflict. Morrison had been tracking radio transmissions and energy signatures from the affected region, trying to understand the scope of the fighting. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Morrison replayed the intercepted communications for the 100th time. The transmissions were fragmented and often cut short, but the pattern was clear. Entire planets were going silent one by one. Distress calls would spike for a few days, then stop completely. No survivors ever transmitted again from any world that went dark. "Computer, display the timeline of communication blackouts," Morrison commanded. A holographic map appeared before him showing dozens of star systems. Red dots marked the locations where all transmissions had ceased. The pattern moved like a wave of death across the galaxy sector, methodical and unstoppable. Each red dot represented millions or billions of lives that had simply stopped existing. Morrison began typing his report for Admiral Lisa Parker, commander of the 3rd Colonial Fleet. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as he tried to put the horror into words. The evidence suggested something far worse than normal warfare. This was systematic extermination on a scale that humanity had never witnessed. The data showed that the attacking force never attempted to capture territory or establish colonies on conquered worlds. They simply destroyed everything and moved on to the next target. Cities were reduced to rubble, spaceports were melted slag, and orbital stations became debris fields. Whatever species was responsible for this destruction had no interest in conquest or resources. They wanted only death. Meanwhile, on the Zephyrian homeworld of Vexthaner Prime, the High Command gathered in their War Council chamber. The room was filled with the Empire's most powerful military leaders, their scaled faces reflecting the light from the large, tactical display that showed their expanded territory. Emperor Vexthaner himself presided over the meeting from his massive throne. His ancient eyes had seen the rise of the Zephyrian Empire from a single world power to the masters of an entire galaxy sector. The Great Cleansing had been his vision, his masterpiece of strategic planning. "My loyal commanders," the Emperor spoke with a voice like grinding stone, "today marks the end of the Great Cleansing. We have eliminated every potential threat to our dominance. We have destroyed every species that might one day challenge our authority. Our empire is now secure for 1,000 generations." The assembled commanders roared their approval, their voices echoing off the chamber walls. They had sacrificed much during the long campaign, lost many ships and warriors, but the cost had been worth paying. Never again would they face the uncertainty of sharing the galaxy with potential rivals. "Begin the consolidation phase," Emperor Vexthanner continued. "Establish mining operations on the most valuable worlds. Build fortress stations at strategic points. Our reign of peace through strength begins now." None of the celebrating Zephyrians knew that their activities had been observed. None suspected that their transmissions had been intercepted and analyzed. None imagined that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, another species was learning about their crimes and preparing to respond. The great cleansing was complete. But the Zephyrians had made one critical error in their planning. They had assumed they knew about every spacefaring civilization in their region of the galaxy. They had been wrong. Captain Ben Rodriguez stood in the command center of the UCS Nightfall, watching the long-range sensors track a damaged vessel limping through space. The stealth reconnaissance ship had been positioned at the edge of what they now called Zephyrian space for 3 weeks, gathering intelligence under strict orders to remain hidden and avoid all contact with unknown vessels. The damaged ship was clearly not Zephyrian based on its design and energy signature. Its hull showed massive burn marks and several sections were completely blown away. Whoever was aboard that vessel had barely escaped with their lives from some terrible battle. "Captain, we're picking up a distress beacon," reported Lieutenant Sarah Walsh from her communications station. "The signal is weak, but it's definitely a call for help. The language is unknown, but the mathematical patterns suggest intelligence." Rodriguez stared at the tactical display showing the dying ship. His orders were crystal clear: maintain radio silence, avoid detection, and gather intelligence only. But those orders had been written before anyone knew about the systematic genocide taking place in this region. Everything had changed since Lieutenant Commander Morrison's reports reached Earth. "How long before that ship loses life support?" Rodriguez asked his science officer. "Based on the damage patterns and energy readings, maybe 6 hours," Lieutenant Commander Frank Davis replied. "Their main power systems are failing, and I'm detecting atmosphere leaks in multiple sections." Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. "All stop. Prepare for rescue operations." "Sir, our orders specifically state," began his first officer, Commander Linda Hayes. "Our orders were written before we knew we were dealing with genocide," Rodriguez interrupted. "I won't watch innocent beings die when we have the power to save them. Begin rescue preparations immediately." The crew of the Nightfall worked quickly to extend their docking tube to the damaged vessel. The unknown ship's hull was made from materials they had never seen before, but their emergency cutting tools managed to create an entry point. The first human to step aboard the alien vessel was Chief Petty Officer Mike Chun, wearing full environmental gear and carrying medical supplies. What Chun found inside shocked him. The ship's interior was clearly designed for beings much taller and thinner than humans. Strange symbols covered the walls, and the lighting was in a spectrum that hurt human eyes to look at directly. But scattered throughout the corridors were bodies that told a story of desperate fighting and ultimate defeat. In the ship's medical bay, Chun found 3 survivors barely clinging to life. They were tall and elegant beings with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Their clothing was torn and burned, and they bore wounds that spoke of energy weapon attacks. The eldest of the 3 was conscious and spoke in a melodic language that Chun could not understand. "Captain, we have 3 survivors," Chun reported over his communicator. "They're badly injured but alive. I think the eldest one is trying to communicate with us." Dr. Amy Watson had been monitoring the rescue operation from Earth through real-time communication links. As the human colonial navy's leading expert on alien psychology and communication, she had been waiting for humanity's first contact with another intelligent species. She had not expected it to happen under such tragic circumstances. "Bring them aboard the Nightfall immediately," Dr. Watson advised through their communication link. Use standard medical protocols and try to establish basic communication through mathematical concepts and pictographs. The survivors were transferred to the Nightfall's medical bay where human doctors worked frantically to save their lives. The eldest survivor, despite his injuries, managed to communicate through simple drawings and basic mathematics. His name, Ustan, and he was what his people called a wise keeper, responsible for preserving the knowledge and history of his civilization. Through painstaking communication efforts over several hours, Than managed to convey the horror of what had happened to his people. The Centauri had been a peaceful civilization of artists, scientists, and philosophers. They had never developed powerful weapons or large military forces. When the Zephyrians arrived, the Centauri had tried to negotiate and find peaceful solutions. The Zephyrians had no interest in peace. They wanted only extinction. Than drew pictures showing the systematic destruction of Centauri worlds. First came orbital bombardment that destroyed cities and spaceports. Then ground forces that hunted down any survivors. Finally, atmospheric processors that poisoned the air and water to prevent any life from returning. The Zephyrians had turned 37 beautiful worlds into lifeless rocks. My people are gone, Than managed to communicate through broken fragments of human language that he learned with remarkable speed. All gone, only us 3 left of billions. Captain Rodriguez transmitted all of this information back to Earth through encrypted channels. Admiral Lisa Parker received the report. While meeting with the Colonial Defense Council in the secure conference room beneath Luna City, the room fell silent as she read Rodriguez's findings aloud. General Patricia Hayes was the first to speak. This confirms Morrison's analysis. We're dealing with a species that commits genocide as a matter of policy. Every day we delay gives them more time to consolidate their gains and prepare for their next campaign. Secretary of State Kevin Brooks shook his head. We need to attempt diplomatic contact first. Maybe they don't realize that other intelligent species deserve to exist. Maybe we can make them understand that genocide is wrong. You can't negotiate with beings who have already decided that your existence is a threat, General Hayes replied. These Zephyrians have spent 50 years systematically exterminating every spacefaring civilization they encounter. What makes you think they'll make an exception for humanity? Dr. Watson had been analyzing the Centauri language patterns and cultural information that Than provided. Her assessment painted a grim picture of Zephyrian psychology. Based on their actions and the cultural data we've gathered, the Zephyrians operate under a philosophy that views any potential competitor as an existential threat. They don't see other species as beings deserving of life. They see them as problems to be solved through elimination. President Richard Cole had been listening to the debate without speaking. Finally, he made the decision that would define humanity's role in galactic affairs. We'll try diplomacy first because that's who we are as a species. But we'll also begin immediate military preparations because that's what the situation requires. If the Zephyrians refuse to stop their genocide, then we'll stop them ourselves. Admiral Parker was given authorization to begin Operation Shepherd's Justice, the largest military mobilization in human history. Every human world would contribute ships, personnel, and resources to create a fleet capable of challenging the Zephyrian Empire. At the same time, diplomatic preparations began for humanity's first formal contact with an alien government. Back aboard the Nightfall, Than continued to recover while teaching human linguists his language and sharing everything he knew about Zephyrian military capabilities. The elderly Centauri had lived through the entire genocide campaign and possessed valuable intelligence about enemy tactics, ship designs, and strategic weaknesses. Your people, Than said to Captain Rodriguez during one of their conversations. Why do you want to help us? We are already dead. Our worlds are gone. Nothing can bring back what was lost. Rodriguez looked at the frail alien who had lost everything. Because someone has to care. Because genocide is always wrong, no matter who commits it. Because if we don't stop them, you won't be the last species they destroy. Ambassador Helen Carter walked through the corridors of the specially constructed meeting facility on Kepler 442b, a small rocky planet that served as neutral ground between human and Zephyrian space. The diplomatic vessel UCS Olive Branch had arrived 3 days earlier, giving the human delegation time to prepare for what many believed would be humanity's most important conversation since the species first looked up at the stars. Carter had spent 30 years in diplomatic service, negotiating trade agreements, territorial disputes, and peace treaties between the various human colonies. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for attempting diplomacy with a species that had committed genocide against 47 different civilizations. She carried with her the hopes of every surviving refugee and the weight of preventing humanity from becoming the 48th victim. Colonel Danny Murphy walked beside her, his military uniform a stark contrast to her diplomatic robes. Murphy commanded the elite security team that had accompanied the delegation, though everyone understood that their small force would be useless if the Zephyrians decided to attack. The real protection for the human delegation came from the 3 heavy cruisers positioned just outside the system, ready to respond if negotiations turned violent. "Ambassador, the Zephyrian delegation has arrived," reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from the communications station. "Their flagship just dropped out of hyperspace and they're requesting permission to approach the station." Carter nodded and made her way to the main conference room. The facility had been constructed with input from Than, the Centauri survivor, who had provided detailed information about Zephyrian environmental needs and cultural protocols. The room was larger than necessary, with high ceilings and carefully controlled lighting that could accommodate both human and Zephyrian preferences. Admiral Kekstar entered the conference room with his own diplomatic team, though Carter noticed that every Zephyrian present wore military insignia rather than civilian clothing. The admiral was larger than she had expected, nearly 8 feet tall with dark green scales that reflected the overhead lights. His cold yellow eyes swept the room, cataloging every human present and every possible threat. "I am Admiral Kekstar of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy," he announced in accented but clear human language. "I represent the authority of Emperor Vexthaner and the interests of the Zephyrian Empire. You may present your request for our consideration." Carter had rehearsed this moment countless times during the journey to Kepler 442b. She stood and activated the holographic display that showed the affected star systems. "I am Ambassador Helen Carter, representing the United Nations of Earth and the Human Colonial Government. We are here to discuss the systematic extermination campaigns that your empire has conducted against innocent civilizations throughout this region of space." "You refer to the Great Cleansing," Kekstar replied without any sign of shame or regret. "A necessary strategic operation to secure the safety and dominance of the Zephyrian people. Every species eliminated posed a potential threat to our empire's future security." The casual way he discussed genocide made Carter's blood run cold, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. These species were not threats. Many of them, like the Centauri, were peaceful civilizations focused on art, science, and philosophy. They possessed no significant military forces and had never shown aggression toward any other species. "Peaceful species become aggressive when they develop sufficient technology," Kekstar responded. "It is more efficient to eliminate potential threats before they become actual threats. This is basic strategic thinking that any intelligent species should understand." Carter activated another section of the holographic display showing the scope of the destruction. 47 civilizations completely destroyed, billions of innocent beings killed, entire worlds rendered lifeless. "This is not strategy, Admiral. This is genocide on an unprecedented scale." "This is survival," Kekstar said with finality. "The galaxy is a hostile place where only the strongest species endure. The Zephyrian Empire ensures its survival by eliminating competition before that. Competition becomes dangerous. Your species would be wise to accept this reality." Colonel Murphy shifted slightly in his seat, his hand moving unconsciously toward his sidearm. Carter caught the movement and gave him a subtle signal to remain calm, starting a firefight in. The conference room would accomplish nothing except proving Zephyrian beliefs about the violent nature of other species. Humanity's position is clear, Carter stated formally. We demand immediate cessation of all extermination campaigns. We demand reparations and assistance for any surviving refugee populations. We demand establishment of protected zones where developing civilizations can grow without fear of attack. And we demand that those responsible for genocide face justice. Under galactic law. Kekstar's mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of sharp teeth in what might have been laughter. Your demands are noted and rejected. The Zephyrian Empire does not recognize any authority higher than our own. We do not pay reparations to inferior species. We do not protect our enemies. And we certainly do not submit to the judgment of aliens. Then, let me present humanity's alternative offer, Carter said, her voice taking on a harder edge. Immediate withdrawal from all conquered territories. Complete demilitarization of your expansion fleets. Submission to external monitoring of your military activities. And cooperation with a galactic tribunal to address your crimes against sentient life. And if we refuse these absurd demands, Kekstar asked with obvious amusement, then humanity will take whatever actions are necessary to protect innocent life and prevent future genocide, Carter replied. We have seen what your empire does to peaceful species. We will not allow it to continue. Kekstar studied the human delegation with new interest. You speak as if your species possesses the military capability to challenge the Zephyrian Empire. Our intelligence suggests that humanity controls perhaps 50 star systems. The Empire controls over 300 systems and possesses the accumulated military resources of every species we have conquered. Our military capabilities are not the subject of these negotiations, Carter said carefully. We are here to offer you an opportunity to change course before events spiral beyond anyone's control. Very well, Kekstar said after consulting with his advisors in the harsh Zephyrian language. The Empire will make a counteroffer out of respect for your courage in requesting this meeting. Humanity will submit to imperial authority within one solar cycle. You will surrender your colonial fleets and submit to integration into the Empire. In exchange, we will allow your species to continue existing under Zephyrian oversight. Integration, Carter repeated. You mean slavery. We mean survival, Kekstar corrected. The alternative is the same fate that befell the other species who refused our generous offers of integration. 47 civilizations chose extinction over submission. Perhaps humanity will prove more intelligent. Carter looked around the conference room at her fellow humans and then back at the Zephyrian delegation. We need time to consider your offer. You have one solar cycle, Kekstar stated. When that time expires, the Empire will begin mapping your territory and planning appropriate military responses to your inevitable refusal. I suggest you use the time wisely to prepare your people for what is coming. The meeting ended with formal diplomatic protocols, but everyone present understood that negotiations had failed completely. The Zephyrians had no interest in changing their genocidal policies and viewed humanity as just another species to be conquered or eliminated. As the delegations prepared to return to their respective ships, Carter realized that her mission had accomplished one important goal. Confirming that diplomacy was impossible, Colonel Murphy approached her as they walked back to the olive branch. Ambassador, did you notice that the Admiral kept checking his communication device during the meeting? I noticed, Carter replied. He was receiving regular updates about something he considered more important than our negotiations. I think they've already dispatched scouts to map human space, Murphy said quietly. They're not taking our warnings seriously because they don't believe we have the capability to back them up, Carter nodded grimly. Then it's time for them to learn that humanity has never been good at accepting impossible odds. Admiral Lisa Parker stood in the Strategic Command Center buried deep beneath Luna City, watching the largest military mobilization in human history unfold across dozens of holographic displays. Ships from every human world were converging on the staging areas, creating what would become known as the Liberation Fleet. The sight filled her with both pride and terror as she realized that Humanity was about to face its greatest test as a spacefaring civilization. "Admiral, the Mars Defense Fleet has arrived at Rally Point Alpha," reported Captain Steve Johnson from his position aboard the heavy cruiser UCS Retribution. 37 ships, including 6 heavy cruisers and 2 assault carriers. All vessels. Report ready for combat operations. Parker nodded and marked another group as arrived on her tactical display. The numbers were impressive but also sobering. Humanity could field approximately 300 combat-capable vessels, ranging from massive battleships to small but deadly corvettes. Intelligence reports suggested that the Zephyrian Empire possessed over 800 warships, accumulated over 50 years of conquering other civilizations. "What's the status on the outer colony contributions?" Parker asked her aide, Commander Jane Walsh. "The Tau Ceti Defense Force arrived yesterday with 80 ships," Walsh replied, reading from her datapad. "The Proxima Centauri Squadron is en route with 12 vessels, and the Kepler Colony Militia is sending everything they have, about 25 ships total. Even the mining colonies are contributing whatever armed vessels they can spare." Lieutenant Sandra Kim worked frantically in the engineering bay of the UCS Retribution, overseeing modifications to the ship's weapon systems. Human technology had developed along different lines than Zephyrian engineering, and early analysis of captured enemy equipment suggested that human energy weapons might be more effective than expected against Zephyrian shields and armor. "Chief, how are the modifications coming along?" Captain Johnson asked as he visited the engineering section. "Better than expected, sir," Kim replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Our plasma cannons can be recalibrated to frequencies that should penetrate their defensive systems more effectively. The real advantage is our targeting computers. They're much more sophisticated than anything the Zephyrians use." Meanwhile, throughout human space, Zephyrian scout ships probed the defenses of various colonies and outposts. The scouts expected to find the typical scattered defensive arrangements of a young spacefaring civilization: a few patrol ships, some orbital platforms, and minimal coordination between different worlds. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented. Commander Bill Davis piloted his scout ship through what should have been an empty system between human colonies. His mission was to map defensive installations and identify valuable targets for the coming invasion. Instead, his sensors detected a sophisticated network of automated defense platforms, stealth mines, and communication relays that created an invisible web of protection around human space. "Scout leader to Imperial Command," Davis transmitted, "back to the main Zephyrian fleet. Human defensive systems are more advanced than anticipated. Multiple scout vessels have simply vanished in what appeared to be empty space. Recommend increased caution in future reconnaissance operations." Back on Earth, Dr. Amy Watson worked closely with Than and the other Centauri survivors to understand Zephyrian military doctrine and tactical preferences. The elderly wisekeeper had witnessed dozens of their campaigns and possessed invaluable intelligence about how the Empire conducted warfare. "They rely heavily on overwhelming numerical superiority," Than explained through the translation device that human linguists had constructed. "Zephyrian commanders prefer massive battle formations that can destroy enemy fleets through concentrated firepower. They are not accustomed to facing opponents who use mobility and deception." "What about their command structure?" Dr. Watson asked. "Very rigid," Than replied. "Orders flow from the top down, and lower-ranking officers rarely show initiative. If you can disrupt their communications or eliminate key commanders, their formations become confused and ineffective." General Patricia Hayes established forward staging areas using mobile space platforms that could be rapidly deployed and repositioned throughout human space. These platforms served multiple functions: supply depots for long-range operations, repair facilities for damaged ships, and communication hubs for coordinating fleet movements across vast distances. "The key to fighting a larger enemy is logistics," General Hayes explained to her staff officers. "We need to be able to sustain operations far from our home bases, while maintaining the flexibility to respond to changing tactical situations. These mobile platforms give us capabilities that the Zephyrians don't expect us to have." Captain Rodriguez had been promoted to admiral and given command of the stealth reconnaissance group. His ships were already operating deep inside Zephyrian space, gathering intelligence and identifying key targets for the coming offensive. The information they provided was crucial for planning operations against an enemy that controlled such a vast territory. Admiral Parker, we've identified the location of the main Zephyrian fleet, Rodriguez reported through encrypted communications. They're consolidating their forces in the Proxima sector, apparently preparing to defend their recent conquests rather than immediately launching attacks against human space. This information changed everything about human strategic planning. If the Zephyrians were adopting defensive positions, it suggested they were taking the human threat more seriously than their diplomatic posturing had indicated. It also meant that humanity might have the initiative in choosing when and where to begin military operations. Colonel Danny Murphy had returned from the failed diplomatic mission with detailed observations about Zephyrian equipment, tactics, and personnel. His report became required reading for every human military officer preparing for combat operations. Their individual soldiers are larger and stronger than humans, Murphy noted in his briefing to Marine commanders. But they're also slower and less adaptable. Their equipment is robust but not particularly sophisticated. Most importantly, they seem to have difficulty adjusting their tactics when facing unexpected situations. The Liberation Fleet continued to grow as more ships arrived from distant colonies and mining operations. Each vessel brought not just firepower but also experienced crews who had served in various conflicts throughout human space. The veterans of the Martian Independence War served alongside survivors of the outer colony conflicts, creating a combined force with diverse tactical experience. Admiral Parker addressed the assembled fleet commanders through holographic transmission, her image appearing simultaneously on hundreds of ships throughout the staging areas. Her words were broadcast to every human world and recorded for history. "Officers and crew of the Liberation Fleet," she began, her voice carrying across the vast distances of space. "Today we face an enemy that has committed genocide against dozens of innocent species. They believe that might makes right. They believe that fear ensures victory. They believe that the strong have the right to exterminate the weak." The transmission continued with Parker outlining the scope of Zephyrian crimes and the moral imperative that drove humanity to action. "We fight not for conquest or glory, but for the simple principle that genocide is always wrong. We fight for species that can no longer fight for themselves. We fight to ensure that the galaxy becomes a place where differences are celebrated rather than eliminated." As the Admiral's speech concluded, final preparations began throughout the fleet. Weapons were tested and retested. Supply lines were verified and secured. Battle plans were reviewed and updated based on the latest intelligence. The largest military force in human history prepared to face an enemy that had never known defeat. In the depths of space, automated manufacturing facilities worked around the clock to produce ammunition, spare parts, and medical supplies for the coming campaign. The industrial capacity of 50 human worlds had been redirected towards supporting military operations on a scale that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. The storm was gathering, and soon it would break upon the Zephyrian Empire with a fury that they could never have anticipated. The Liberation Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima sector like a swarm of angry hornets, their formation unlike anything the Zephyrian Empire had encountered in 50 years of conquest. Instead of the massive battle lines that characterized typical space warfare, the human ships deployed in smaller groups that could move independently while maintaining coordinated attacks against larger enemy formations. Admiral Kekstar stood on the bridge of the Dominion's edge, watching his tactical displays track the incoming human fleet. The numbers favored his forces significantly, over 800 Zephyrian warships against approximately 300 human vessels. He had fought dozens of campaigns with worse odds and always emerged victorious through superior firepower and disciplined formations. "Admiral, the human ships are not following standard battle protocols," reported Commander Vashti from her position at the tactical station. They appear to be dividing into multiple smaller groups rather than maintaining fleet cohesion. Kekstar studied the display with growing confusion. Every spacefaring species the Empire had encountered used similar tactical approaches based on concentrated firepower and protective formations. The humans seemed to be deliberately weakening themselves by splitting their already inferior numbers into even smaller units. Perhaps they lack experience in large-scale space combat, Kekstar mused. Deploy our forces in standard defensive formations around the conquered Centauri worlds. We will let them come to us and destroy them piecemeal as they attempt to assault our positions. What the Zephyrian admiral could not see was the first phase of the human battle plan, already unfolding in the darkness of space. Admiral Rodriguez led a group of stealth ships that had been positioned days earlier, hidden among the asteroids and debris fields that littered the outer system. Their mission was to eliminate Zephyrian sensor networks and communication relays before the main battle began. Captain Jack Thompson commanded the stealth destroyer UCS Shadow, one of 12 ships tasked with crippling enemy communications. His vessel moved silently through space, its advanced stealth systems making it nearly invisible to Zephyrian sensors. The target was a massive communication array that coordinated defensive operations across the entire sector. "Weapons ready, Captain," reported Lieutenant Mike Barnes from the tactical station. "Target acquired and locked." "Fire!" Thompson commanded. The Shadow's plasma torpedoes struck the communication array with devastating effect, turning the massive installation into an expanding cloud of debris. Similar attacks throughout the system eliminated dozens of sensor platforms, communication relays, and early warning stations. Within minutes, the Zephyrian fleet found itself blind and deaf, unable to coordinate their previously overwhelming numerical advantage. Captain Steve Johnson led the first major assault against the Zephyrian battle stations protecting the liberated Centauri worlds. The UCS Retribution and her escort group approached their targets, using an attack pattern that human tactical computers had designated as swarm formation. Alpha, small groups of ships attacking from multiple directions simultaneously, all ships. "This is Retribution Actual," Johnson transmitted to his task force. "Execute attack plan, Charlie. Hit them hard and fast, then break contact before they can respond effectively." The human ships accelerated to attack speed, their advanced engines allowing them to achieve velocities that surprised the Zephyrian defenders. Lieutenant Sandra Kim's engineering modifications proved their worth as the Retribution's upgraded weapons systems tore through enemy shields with efficiency that shocked both sides of the battle. "Captain, their defensive systems are collapsing faster than projected," reported the tactical officer. "Our weapons are significantly more effective against their shield technology than anticipated." The reason became clear as the battle progressed. Zephyrian defensive systems had been designed to counter the weapons and tactics of the species they had already conquered. Human technology had developed along completely different lines, creating weapons that exploited weaknesses the Zephyrians didn't know they had, Admiral. Kekstar watched in growing alarm as his carefully planned defensive formations began to crumble under the unconventional human attacks. His ships were designed for massive fleet engagements where numerical superiority could be brought to bear against enemy formations. The humans refused to fight that kind of battle. "Commander, order Battle Group 7 to intercept the human ships attacking Station Theta," Kekstar commanded. "Sir, Battle Group 7 is not responding to communications," Vashti replied with obvious concern. "The communication array in that sector has been destroyed and we have no contact with ships in that region." For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kekstar found himself fighting an enemy that he could not understand or predict. The humans seemed to know exactly where his forces were positioned while keeping their own ships hidden until the moment of attack. They struck with devastating effectiveness and then vanished before his superior numbers could respond. The turning point of the battle came when Colonel Danny Murphy led a Special Forces assault on the Dominion's edge itself. Using intelligence gathered during the diplomatic mission, human Marines infiltrated the massive flagship while it was distracted by the larger space battle raging around it. "Delta Team, this is Murphy," the colonel transmitted to his assault group. We're approaching the enemy command center. Remember, we need the admiral alive for intelligence purposes. The Marines moved through the ship's corridors with deadly efficiency, their advanced combat armor and weapons giving them significant advantages in the close quarters fighting that followed. Zephyrian soldiers were larger and stronger than humans, but they were also slower and less adaptable to rapidly changing tactical situations. Lieutenant Amy Foster led one of the Marine squads through the ship's engineering section, neutralizing Zephyrian defenders while avoiding damage to critical systems. The goal was to capture the flagship intact rather than destroy it, preserving valuable intelligence and demonstrating human capabilities to the surviving enemy forces. "Colonel, we've reached the bridge," Foster reported. "Heavy resistance, but nothing we can't handle." Murphy and his team breached the command center just as Admiral Kekstar was attempting to coordinate a counterattack against the human fleet. The sight of human soldiers appearing on his own bridge shocked the Zephyrian admiral more than any tactical defeat could have accomplished. "Admiral Kekstar," Murphy announced formally, "by the authority of the human colonial government and in the name of the species you have murdered, you are under arrest for crimes against sentient life." The capture of the Zephyrian flagship sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet. Without their commanding admiral and with their communications networks in ruins, the rigid Zephyrian command structure began to collapse completely. Individual ship commanders found themselves isolated and unable to coordinate with their allies. Captain Rodriguez exploited this confusion by leading coordinated strikes against the largest remaining Zephyrian vessels. His task force used hit-and-run tactics that prevented the enemy from bringing their superior numbers to bear in decisive engagements. Each successful attack further demoralized the Zephyrian forces and demonstrated the effectiveness of human military doctrine. The liberation of the first Centauri refugee camps provided the most emotionally powerful moment of the entire battle. When human Marines arrived at the prison facilities on the surface of former Centauri worlds, they found thousands of survivors who had been kept alive for forced labor and medical experimentation. Than was among the Marines who participated in the liberation operations, using his knowledge of Centauri language and culture to help coordinate the rescue efforts. The elderly wisekeeper had insisted on participating despite his age and frail condition, driven by the hope of finding other survivors of his people. "My friends," Than spoke to a group of liberated Centauri refugees, "these humans have traveled across the galaxy to fight for us. They risk their lives for people they have never met because they believe that genocide is wrong." The rescued Centauri watched in amazement as human soldiers distributed medical supplies, food, and humanitarian aid rather than claiming the territory they had just conquered. This behavior was so completely different from Zephyrian practices that many refugees initially believed it was some kind of deception or trap. As the battle for the Proxima Sector reached its conclusion, the scope of human victory became clear to both sides. The Zephyrian Empire had lost over 200 ships, their commanding admiral, and control of an entire sector. More importantly, they had lost their aura of invincibility and their confidence in their military superiority. The human casualties were remarkably light considering the scale of the engagement. Advanced medical technology, superior tactical doctrine, and careful planning had minimized losses, while maximizing the effectiveness of each ship and soldier committed to the battle. Admiral Parker received the battle reports while coordinating the next phase of operations from her command ship. The victory in the Proxima Sector was just the beginning of what would become humanity's largest military campaign. The Zephyrian Empire still controlled hundreds of star systems and possessed vast military resources. The final assault on the Zephyrian home system began with the largest coordinated military operation in galactic history. Admiral Lisa Parker commanded the entire Liberation fleet from her flagship UCS Justice, leading over 400 human vessels and their allied ships toward the heart of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 50 years. The operation would demonstrate not just human military capability, but their commitment to precision warfare that protected innocent life even while destroying tyrannical regimes. Captain Sally Martinez guided the assault carrier UCS Liberation through the outer defenses of the Vexthaner system, deploying atmospheric fighters piloted by veterans like Commander Pete Davis. These pilots had trained extensively for urban combat operations, learning to distinguish between military and civilian targets even in the chaos of planetary assault operations. All fighter squadrons, this is Liberation Control, Martinez transmitted to her pilots. Remember your mission parameters? Military targets only. Avoid civilian infrastructure. We're here to liberate, not to conquer. Commander Davis led his squadron through the upper atmosphere of Vexthaner Prime, dodging defensive fire while identifying legitimate military targets. The Zephyrian capital city sprawled across several continents, mixing civilian residential areas with government buildings and military installations. Human targeting computers had been programmed with strict rules of engagement that prioritized precision over destruction. Control, this is Eagle Leader, Davis reported. I have visual on the Imperial Command Center. Surrounding structures appear to be civilian housing, requesting clearance for precision strike using guided munitions. The human approach to warfare confused and frustrated the Zephyrian defenders. Every species they had conquered had fought with the same brutal tactics that the Empire employed, massive bombardments that reduced cities to rubble regardless of civilian casualties. The humans seemed obsessed with avoiding unnecessary destruction, even when such restraint made their military operations more difficult and dangerous. Emperor Vexthaner watched the human assault from his throne room deep within the Imperial Palace. His ancient eyes had seen the rise of the Zephyrian Empire from a single world to the master of hundreds of star systems. Now he witnessed human forces systematically dismantling his military while carefully avoiding damage to civilian areas. My Emperor, reported General Vexkar from the Defense Command Center, the humans have destroyed our orbital defense platforms and neutralized our fleet, but they refuse to target civilian infrastructure. Their ground forces are advancing only against military installations. They fight like fools, Emperor Vexthaner snarled. Weakness disguised as mercy. When we defeat them, we will show them how real warfare is conducted. But the Emperor's confidence was misplaced. Human forces had already penetrated the outer defenses of the capital city and were advancing toward the government district with overwhelming superiority. Zephyrian soldiers found themselves outgunned, outmaneuvered, and completely unable to adapt to human tactical innovations. Dr. Amy Watson coordinated the massive humanitarian operation that followed each military victory, working with liberated populations throughout the former empire. Human aid workers established provisional governments and began the enormous task of rebuilding civilizations that had been deliberately destroyed by Zephyrian genocide campaigns. The challenge isn't just providing immediate aid, Dr. Watson explained to her team of specialists. We need to help these species rebuild their cultures, their languages, their entire sense of identity after decades or centuries of oppression. The work was complicated by the sheer scale of destruction that the Zephyrians had inflicted. Entire languages had been lost when their last speakers were murdered. Cultural artifacts spanning thousands of years had been destroyed to prevent subjected populations from maintaining their heritage. Scientific knowledge had been deliberately suppressed to keep conquered species dependent on their Zephyrian masters. Captain Rodriguez, now promoted to admiral, led the final push toward the Imperial Palace. His forces had fought their way through the city's defenses, while maintaining strict adherence to rules of engagement that prohibited targeting civilian areas. The advance was slower than traditional assault tactics would have allowed, but it demonstrated humanity's commitment to protecting innocent life even during warfare. Admiral Parker, this is Rodriguez, he transmitted from his command vehicle. We've reached the outer perimeter of the Imperial Palace. Zephyrian forces are using civilian shields, but our precision weapons can neutralize military targets without harming non-combatants. The climactic confrontation occurred when Admiral Parker herself entered the throne room of Emperor Vexthaner after the fall of the Imperial Palace. The ancient Zephyrian ruler sat on his massive throne, surrounded by the artifacts and trophies of 47 extinct civilizations. His yellow eyes burned with hatred as he faced the human admiral who had destroyed his empire. "Human," Emperor Vexthanner spoke with a voice like grinding stone, "you have won through treachery and cowardice. Your species fights without honor, showing mercy to the weak and avoiding decisive action against your enemies." Admiral Parker looked around the throne room at the displayed remains of destroyed civilizations. Centauri art hung on the walls next to Altarian scientific instruments and Kepler Federation cultural artifacts. Each item represented millions of lives lost to Zephyrian genocide. "Your Majesty," Parker replied formally, "you demand to know why we fight for species we've never met. The answer is simple, because someone has to. Because genocide is always wrong, regardless of who commits it or why. Because we judge civilizations not by their power to destroy, but by their willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves." "Weakness," the Emperor snarled. "Your mercy will be your downfall. Other species will see your restraint as invitation to rebellion. Your empire will crumble as all weak governments do." "We're not building an empire," Parker explained. "We're helping free peoples rebuild their own civilizations. Every liberated world will govern itself according to its own traditions and values. Humanity has no interest in ruling over other species." This concept was so foreign to Zephyrian thinking that Emperor Vexthanner could not comprehend it. His entire worldview was based on the assumption that all intelligent species sought dominance over their neighbors. The idea that humans would fight a massive war simply to protect the rights of others was literally incomprehensible to him. The establishment of the Galactic Reconstruction Authority marked the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. Representatives from dozens of liberated species gathered on the neutral world of New Harmony to begin the work of rebuilding their civilizations and preventing future genocides. Ambassador Helen Carter addressed the Assembly as its first elected president. Her words broadcast throughout the liberated territories and beyond to species that were only now learning that freedom was possible. "We gather here not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals united by shared experience and common purpose," Carter announced. "The species represented in this assembly have survived attempted extinction. We have seen the worst that intelligent beings can inflict upon each other. Now we must work together to ensure that such horrors never happen again." The Zephyrian military was formally disbanded, and its leaders faced trial for crimes against sentient life. The trials were conducted according to legal principles established by the liberated species themselves, ensuring that justice reflected the values of those who had suffered under Zephyrian oppression rather than being imposed by human authority. Former Zephyrian colonies were returned to their original inhabitants whenever possible. Worlds where entire species had been exterminated became memorial sites dedicated to preserving the memory of lost civilizations. The goal was not revenge against the Zephyrian people, but prevention of future genocides through education and remembrance. TAN established the Archive of Lost Voices on the former Zephyrian capital world, working with human historians and archaeologists to reconstruct the cultures and achievements of extinct species. The elderly Centauri had lived to see his people's liberation and the restoration of their cultural heritage, though the physical worlds of his species remained lifeless monuments to imperial cruelty. Every species that was lost had something unique to contribute to galactic civilization, Than explained to visitors at the archive. The Altarians were master mathematicians who solved equations that we still don't understand. The Kepler Federation created art forms that combined music, light, and emotion in ways that moved beings of any species to tears. All of this knowledge died with them, and the galaxy is poorer for that loss. Captain Rodriguez led the newly formed Galactic Patrol, a joint military force dedicated to protecting, developing civilizations from aggression and preventing the rise of future genocidal empires. The patrol operated under strict guidelines that emphasized defense over offense and protection over conquest. "Our mission is simple," Rodriguez explained to his officers during their first briefing. "We watch for signs of aggressive expansion. or systematic oppression. We offer protection to species that request it,